of the presentation, feel free to put your questions in the chat box. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Oliveira. Thank you, Dr. Unmute. Oh, you're muted. I am muted. You are muted. Yes, we'll unmute you. Kathy, just a second.
Okay.
Perfect.
I unmuted myself when you were talking, and then I couldn't unmute myself again. So I apologize for that. So thank you so much, Amit, for the introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So can you all see that? Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's such a wonderful opportunity to be here with you all today. Umit invited me for this like a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, and we thought that we would all be together in Calgary, but as we know, it didn't happen. So I'm happy that it worked out, that we could be virtually connected today. So here's just my information. My topic for today is culturally sustaining teaching practices in elementary classrooms with multilingual learners. So a quick overview. I'm going to be describing ways that 2 elementary teachers have continuously supported multilingual learners. I will identify some culturally sustaining teaching practices that promote learning through language and learning about language by 2 elementary teachers, and conclude with how we can, as we know from the conference theme, shift linguistic landscapes for multilingual learners. So what are culturally sustaining pedagogies? They address the multi-ethnic and multilingual nature of many classrooms and maintain, hence the word sustaining in its title, the practices of students while also expanding their repertoires to include, quote, dominant languages, literacies, and other cultural practices, end quote. So students are also able to critique those practices. And one of the goals of culturally sustaining pedagogies is to help perpetuate and foster linguistic, literate, and cultural pluralism as part of the democratic project of schooling. And this is a crucial goal in the education of multilingual learners. So my presentation and my work and research is contextualized around culturally sustaining pedagogies. So we're looking at specifically teaching practices in 2 elementary classrooms that you learn more about as we go through the presentation today. So they draw on students' culturally and linguistic affordances to promote learning through language and learning about language. I conceptualize CSTP, as I call it, so the acronym for Culturally Sustaining Teaching Practices, as being very much connected to scaffolding for meaningful interactions. We have what we call planned scaffolding and also interactional scaffolding. And typically we focus a lot in classrooms on what we call planned scaffolding. And today I'm going to share some more examples of what we mean by interactional scaffolding and how they are culturally sustaining teaching practices. So connecting them to this framework of CSTP. So what is planned and interactional scaffolding? I'll start with planned scaffolding. For example, you have drawing on students' prior knowledge and experience. So that relates to connecting to what students already know. We have selection and sequencing of tasks. So providing a logical sequence in which in-depth understanding of challenging concepts occurs within the appropriate context. We also have different participant structures. Changing the organizational structure within a unit of instruction can refer to, for example, doing individual, pair work, group work, and that's highly dependent on the learning purposes of the task or activity. You have what we call semiotic systems and message abundance, and that refers to using various visual, oral, and tactile supports. For example, some examples could be wall charts, graphs, maps, photographs, diagrams, etc., that create what we call message abundance to ensure that students' access to information are both language bound and through non-linguistic means. We also have mediational texts or key texts that are used in classrooms. So selecting and integrating any instrumental text around which significant talk occurs and which serve as ways to link prior or future learning. So you're going to hear about two of these texts today. Developing metalinguistic and metacognitive awareness. Metalinguistic awareness refers to how we can develop a meta language or a language for talking about language with our multilingual learners. And metacognition refers to reflecting on what helps students learn. So these are some things that we plan for, okay, in instruction. There are also some things that we want to do at the micro level, or what we call interactional scaffolding, linking to prior experience, pointing to new experiences, and recapping is really critical. So this means referencing students out of school, home, and school experiences to link to broader conceptual frameworks. Locating, quote, new learning in students' prior experiences and signaling what will follow is particularly important for students less familiar with the language and culture of the school. And I'm drawing here from Hammond and Gibbons. We also have appropriating and recasting students' contribution. And that refers to picking up what students are saying, recasting students' language into more content, language, or context appropriate discourse. We're going to see an example of that. And finally, initiation, response, feedback sequence. So this refers to providing opportunities for students to say more and reflect aloud on their thinking and understanding. This also includes asking for clarifications, probing a student's response, asking to explain a particular point in detail. There are other moves there as well. And it contrasts to IRE, or initiation response evaluation, which is a typical pattern of classroom discourse. So let's say I ask my student, what color is my top? That's the initiation by the teacher. The student answers, red. And then I say, excellent. That's an evaluation. And then I move on. So that third move within initiation response, and instead of evaluation, we provide feedback. We ask an additional question. We ask students to clarify. We ask students to say more. We probe them. That third move within the IRE or IRF sequence in this case is extremely important for our multilingual learners, for them to say more and do more in our classrooms. So that's what we're talking about. So I want to share what we have found in terms of results. I'm going to do this a little bit different. I'm not going to share methods, research questions, etc. I'm going to go ahead and share the results first. So for planned scaffolding of the culturally sustaining teaching practices that we have noticed in the two elementary classrooms that you're going to hear about today, we have use of multilingual learners' home languages and cultures as a resource. We have the integration of languages and cultures of multilingual learners into instruction and also discussions. We have teachers that have developed a language for talking about language or a meta language. We also have the use of message abundance to provide challenging content and not simplifying instruction. For interactional scaffolding, we have encouraged classroom interactions through the use of interactional scaffolding moves, which I'm going to go over right now. So these interactional scaffolding moves are really, really important for our multilingual learners. And this came out, these interactional scaffolding moves have been published in the literature, some of them, and some come from our work in these two classrooms. So one of them is what we call appropriation. So teachers utilize language and tools previously used by students. We also have recapping. Teachers briefly summarize the main points of the interaction. We have what we call recasting. Teachers put what students say into academically appropriate discourse, or sometimes more culturally appropriate discourse, depending on what they use in terms of language. Cued elicitation. Teachers offer strong hints, either spoken or gestural, of expected responses. Moving the discourse forward. Teachers provide students with opportunities to say more. And the moving the discourse forward is specifically really, really important, we have seen in these classrooms that we have worked in. And because we want our multilingual learners to say more and do more with talk. And so this is a particularly important move made by teachers. We have what we call elaboration. Teachers supplement contributions with additional information. We also have clarification. Teachers clarify what students say. And we have, lastly, what we have found in these two classrooms is the interactional scaffolding move that we are calling purposeful repetition. Teachers draw attention, repeat so all can hear, and provide cues to self-correct or extend thoughts. So purposeful repetition is also very important and typically occurs with moving the discourse forward. It's been really interesting to notice that in some of these examples that I'm going to share today. So I'm going to talk about two research studies. The focus was scaffolding for meaningful interactions with multilingual learners. One was a kindergarten teacher in Indiana, and one is a first grade teacher in Florida. And we focused on planned and interactional scaffolding and also the teaching of writing. So today I'm going to be focusing on planned and interactional scaffolding. So for the first study, we have a kindergarten classroom at Gallant Elementary School in Indiana. Mrs. Ruby Lee was the teacher, and this is a pseudonym. She's a white American. She considers herself a monolingual, and I put that in quotes because she has developed Spanish language skills as a classroom resource, and I consider that to be also her to be an experienced teacher. She had 23, not first grade, kindergarten students, and 8 classified as ELL, and they were all Spanish speakers. And we took, these are the data sources. We took field notes, we observed the teacher, interviews, documents, lesson plans, photographs, all of that. And we focused on scaffolding in classroom instruction for multilingual learners. The mediational text that Ms. Lee used with her class was "When I'm Old with You." I don't know if you're familiar with that particular text, but it's wonderful to talk about the relationship between grandpa and his grandchild. And what we noticed from Ms. Lee classroom is that there was a lot of academic and social support and a range of planned scaffolds with selection and sequencing of tasks, with step-by-step direction of activities, providing a logical sequence, with participant structures varying within the unit according to the nature of the task, the degree and nature of scaffolding, and grouping also changed depending on those particular ideas. Message abundance was a key feature, use of home languages and cultures, and very purposeful interactional scaffolds in classroom interactions, including explicit links to culture and prior experiences, moving the discourse forward, clarification and elaboration, appropriation and recasting students' contributions also. So in terms of using message abundance to provide challenging content and not simplifying instruction as a culturally responsive teaching practice, Ms. Lee uses all of the potential meaning-making techniques that she has at hand. For example, technology, use of interactive whiteboards, videos, interactive worksheets, to other multimodal strategies such as gestures, body language, songs, and picture books. She also uses illustrative pictures from the book to talk about important concepts and to also raise students' awareness of the meanings expressed in the book. And we have an example here from the classroom discourse. And I'm going to ask maybe Umit to be the students for me, and I will be Mrs. Lee. Do you think the boy loves bacon so much that's, oops, sorry. I'm trying to move my, here. Do you think the boy loves bacon so much that's the reason he wants to have bacon? Or do you think there's another reason he's telling me this? Chris?
Yes, he loves the bacon.
Ah, okay. So what's the most important to think, what is the most important to him right now? Eating the bacon or something else?
He's with granddad.
Because he's with his granddaddy. I think so too. It's that look. Look how happy that boy looks. I don't think he's that happy because he's eating bacon. I think he's happy because he's with his granddaddy.
The picture is nice.
And I like this picture too. Remember when we talked about relatives? Look at all these people. The teacher points to the drawings that students did. So here we see how Mrs. Lee, oh, sorry. I'm trying to move my screen here. There you go. Here we can see how Mrs. Lee is using message abundance to provide challenging content and not simplify instructions. So the idea here is she is analyzing the picture with the students. And remember, this is kindergarten, okay? And so talking about the connection between eating bacon and being with granddaddy, being with granddad is really important in this sense. So this is something that we're going to see as well in other instances. Another example is developing a language for talking about language or developing a meta language. So here's another example with Mrs. Lee. So she says, these are the biggest words, right? Usually wherever the letters are bigger and have a pretty font, a font means what the letters look like. So you see how these letters are kind of twirly and these are kind of straight. These are called different fonts. They're all letters. You can read them, right?
Yes.
Okay, see this M? Does it look exactly the same as this one? So you can imagine, right? The picture, the teacher is pointing to different things.
No.
No, it's a little different. What's called the different font? That's called a different font. Usually, wherever the font is biggest and pretty, that's the title. So this is the
Title.
Okay, so we have some examples of other interactional scaffolding moves here, but what I wanted to show was that the teacher here is talking about fonts. And again, this is probably the first time that the students are hearing about fonts and connection to the letters and how they look within that particular book that they're reading. So thinking about like twirly, and these are kind of straight. So the teacher is describing and talking about this as part of talking about language and how those things are important pieces of the book. So then for planned scaffolding, you can see here another example. We have two culturally sustaining teaching practices exemplified. One is the integration of home languages and cultures into instruction, and also use of multilingual learners' home languages and cultures as a resource. So this is just Mrs. Lee. Oh, I don't know why this is happening all the time. I'm pushing too fast. So who has at least one grandma? ¿Quién tiene una abuela? Everybody has a grandma? ¿Todos tienen una abuela? Sí? Yes? Or who has a grandpa? Raise your hand if you have a grandpa. ¿Quién tiene un abuelo? If you don't have a grandpa, then do this for your grandma, okay? Si no tienes un abuelo, puedes dibujar tu abuela. If you have both, you can choose one. So here, Mrs. Lee is using students' home languages, which is Spanish. She has all Spanish speakers represented in her classroom. And she's both integrating students' home languages and cultures into instruction and also using their home languages as a resource. So for example, when she says, si no tienes un abuelo, puedes dibujar tu abuela. So that's almost exactly what she said in English. She said, if you don't have a grandpa, then do this for your grandma. That meant drawing, actually. So the do this refers to drawing, which was what the students were doing, connected to the book that they were reading. So she says, if not, if you don't have a grandpa, you can draw your grandma. If you have both, you can choose one. So here, I think it's important to show how Mrs. Lee has developed Spanish language competencies to be able to use them as resources in the classroom, even though she considers herself a monolingual English speaker. I think that that's really relevant, also connected to Ophelia's talk this morning. So here's another example. So I will be Mrs. Lee, and maybe Kathy could be Guadalupe. And students, if she's available.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'll start. Reading from the textbook. In the evening, we can roast corn on a big fire and invite everyone we know and eat it. We can play cards and dance and talk about everything. Guadalupe, I've been to your families. Where you're building the new house. You guys don't roast it over fire. How do you make corn?
We put it in hot water.
No, you have to read it from the...
I can't see it. Sorry.
Oh, you can't see it?
Sorry. Now I can see it. Okay. Well, we just make fire with dogs, and we make marshmallows and chocolate and crackers.
That's s'mores. You roast your marshmallows over a fire, don't you? But when you guys make corn, don't you have a special oven outside you put it in? It's yummy. It's not a grill. They actually have an oven like in Mexico. They have a really cool oven where they can put the corn in and it tastes yummy. It kind of roasts it like a fire, but it's inside an oven. We usually in the in the United States, most of us, when we have a fire, we roast marshmallows. What else have you roasted over a fire?
Hot dogs.
Hot dogs. Hot dogs. Thank you so much. So here we see several examples of planned and interactional scaffolding as culturally sustaining teaching practices. For example, we see the integration of cultures of multilingual learners into discussions. So you have what is in the reddish color. You guys don't roast it over a fire. And then she asks a question of, so what I'm calling for interactional scaffolding, the move of moving the discourse forward. So asking one particular student who's identified as an English language learner, how do you make corn? So the student doesn't quite explain what the teacher is asking, but what is really important is that the student was able to say something else about this topic, which I think is still very relevant. We also have clarification when the teacher says that's s'mores, to refer to what Guadalupe has just shared. And then she goes on to explain. And we also have another interactional scaffolding move of moving the discourse forward. And lastly, what we have is called purposeful repetition. The teacher is repeating what the students have said. So all of these are really extremely relevant for this classroom. And all of this entire example or exchange, I would consider as part of integration of cultures of multilingual learners into discussions. So something else that we have here is, I'm running out of time, so I'm looking to maybe go a little bit faster on these examples. So we have, so where are they at? Outside. Mrs. Lee says outside, maybe at their house, though at grandpa's house, yeah. So the grandpa is sitting there, right? The grandma's sitting, and they like to do what? Sweat the flies, sweat the flies. So we have purposeful repetition here. We also have what we call elaboration, because the teacher is asking where they are. The students say outside. She repeats that, but then she elaborates and provides more information and says their house, and then even more explicitly, grandpa's house. Then clarification. So the grandpa is sitting there, right? And they like to do what? So this is very clearly cued, what we call the move of cued elicitation. So the teacher is providing a hint for students to say something that they have already read or they can recall from the text. So that's another example. And also lastly, purposeful repetition. So all of these moves are very important for multilingual learners to be able to say more and do more in this classroom. So the next study, and I'll try to go quickly, was in a first grade classroom with Miss Cabana. You can see some of the information on her classroom. We used similar data sources, and the data analysis, we focused on scaffolding in classroom instruction. The mediational text that she used was "Last Stop on Market Street." And she does a lot of connections. She makes a lot of connections to students and also provides different supports. She also uses a range of planned scaffolds, primarily connecting to what students already know, different participant structures that enhance community and collaboration, support for use of home languages and cultures that the students are actually using, integration of their cultures into instruction and discussions. She also used several interactional scaffolds, including explicit links to culture and prior experiences, moving the discourse forward, appropriation and recasting of students' contributions, and purposeful repetition. And moving the discourse forward and purposeful repetition are really important for Ms. Cabana. So here is one example, and I would like to read that one because it's really important. So as we're reading, try to think about the different interactional scaffolding moves going on here, okay? So I'm going to start. The story that we're going to start is Last Stop on Market Street. Before we begin, I wanted to ask you some things. First of all, has anyone gone away to visit a family member? Juan, who did you go visit?
My grandpa and grandma
And where do they live?
in Argentina, and I'm going there this Christmas.
Oh, for the holiday break, you'll be heading over there. What do you need to take to get there? Because you live here in Florida. So what do you take to get to Argentina?
A plane.
A plane. Do you go with your whole family, or does mom and dad take you there and you stay with them for a little while by yourself?
I go with my whole family.
Okay. So in this example, we have, of course, again, integration of cultures. We also have moving the discourse forward in several of these examples. For example, I mentioned the typical IRE versus IRF. So the F sequence here, so you have the initiation by the teacher with who did you go visit? Has anyone gone away to visit a family member? The student responds, and then instead of the teacher just evaluating and saying excellent and moving on to somebody else, no, she asks more questions of Juan, who is identified as an English language learner. And where do they live? So that where do they live is an example of moving the discourse forward. And all of these moves, or the different questions that are asked, are really critical for our multilingual learners to say more and do more in our classrooms. This is what we call recasting. For the holiday break, you'll be heading over there. What is different between saying, I am going there this Christmas, and for the holiday break, you'll be heading over there? Anybody? And why is that an important recast? So do we have somebody in the chat? She's not just repeating, right? She is rephrasing. And why is that an important? Not exactly, Stephanie. Exactly. Not all students celebrate Christmas. So why is it important for a teacher to be aware of that? Actually, she has a lot of students who celebrate Hanukkah in this classroom. So instead of saying something different, right? She said, for the holiday break, you'll be heading over there. So not everybody celebrates Christmas, but everybody in this class has a holiday break, right, as part of the school. So this was a very important recast by this teacher, right, into what we call more appropriate discourse. So for this case, it is more culturally appropriate, right, to talk about a holiday break. Then we have, several other examples of interactional scaffolding or moving the discourse forward with what do you take to get there, what do you take to get to Argentina, and with the purposeful repetition of a plane, right? A plane, and then she asks another question. So typically with Ms. Cabana, she repeats and then asks something else that moves the discourse forward. So I think that that's really important for our multilingual learners. And again, another moving the discourse forward. Here's another example. So we have Hugo. Umit, can you be Hugo for us?
Sure.
Okay, so Hugo is traveling from Miami, Florida to Brazil, which is in South America, like Nico does too. And then this time you're not only visiting your grandparents, but also your aunt and uncle. That is his tio and his tia. And sometimes you stay alone with your grandparents and your parents come back over here to work.
Yeah, and my aunts and my uncles.
Okay, so how is that? Because I think you're the first one to say that you spent some time alone with just your grandparents and not your parents. So what was that like?
It was fun
It was fun? Why?
because I slept over with my primo.
Primo is cousin. So he was able to sleep over with his cousins. That is fun. My daughter stays over at her grandmother's too to sleep with her cousins a lot. And that is sometimes her favorite time. Thank you for sharing. So here we see several scaffolding moves. And one of them that I went over is what we call recapping. So recapping happens, you can imagine what happened right before this exchange, right? Hugo was talking about how he goes from Miami to Brazil. And, you know, I go and I stay with my tio and my tia. So you can imagine what had just happened, that Hugo was sharing this information and using Portuguese to share. And the teacher is recapping, right? And saying, but also your aunt and uncle, that is his tio and his tia. So she used that to clarify to the entire class. This class for Miss Cabana was not like Mrs. Lee's class. She had 6 different languages represented in her 23 students. So Portuguese was one of them, Spanish, and some others. And of course, you know, the words in Portuguese are actually the same as in Spanish. In this case, for tio, tia, and primo, it's just pronounced a little bit differently. And but so she was able to then clarify what Hugo used in his explanation to the entire class, and recap and kind of summarize what had just happened. And she also uses moving the discourse forward, purposeful repetition with moving the discourse forward, and using multilingual learners' home languages and cultures as a resource, saying primo is cousin. And the last move is what we call elaboration. That's when the teacher connects to her experiences and knowledge and so on. So in this case, she used the experience of her daughter. And all of this is an example of integration of cultures into instructions. So I'm getting to the last slide. So the whole idea here of presenting these examples and showing them here is to really think about how we can connect to shifting linguistic landscapes, right? The topic for this conference. And I feel like we need to think about teaching as a plurilingual practice to eliminate monolingual practices in classrooms, textbooks, and teacher education. We live in a multilingual world. So that is really, really important. And these examples, I think, showed some of these practices that are so critical, that are not monolingual practices. Instead, they are plurilingual practices. We need to draw on our students' home languages in teaching and challenge the monolingual principle of strict compartmentalization of languages in the classroom, as Ophelia was talking about this morning. Use fluid language practices that affirm linguistic and cultural diversity in and beyond the classroom. Eliminate simplification for multilingual learners. We need what has been called in the literature high challenge and high support classrooms. And we also need to critically analyze everyday practices with a plurilinguistic lens. I want to end with this quote from Paulo Freire. Educação não transforma o mundo, educação muda as pessoas e pessoas mudam o mundo. Education doesn't transform the world, education changes people, and people change the world. We're celebrating Freire Centennial and 50 years since the publication of Pedagogia do Oprimido this past year. And I have a book under contract focusing on Paulo Freire. So wanted to end with that. Of course, I'm originally from Brazil, so I definitely want to bring back to Freire's words all the time. Thank you so much. I will share some of my publications now and open for questions. We have a few minutes, like 6 minutes for questions. And I'm happy to share my PowerPoint with these publications as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Oliveira, for your inspiring presentation and sharing your research and insights. We're now going into the question answer section. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat box and I will moderate them.
Okay.
So let's scan the... So we have one question about message abundance and not simplifying language. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, yes. Thank you for asking that. This is something I've been talking about for a long time within the field of TESOL. And really message abundance relates to providing information in multiple modes. So that's like also including paraphrasing, using synonyms. So there are linguistic pieces and non-linguistic modes as well, included in the notion of message abundance. And the simplification, not simplify, but amplify opportunities for our students. This is something that Pauline Gibbons talks about, right? Some of you may have heard that. So how do we not simplify? So a lot of times for lower levels of English language proficiency, what we have seen in classrooms is you want to simplify your language, you want to simplify texts. And when students move through different levels of language proficiency and become more proficient in an additional language, those practices are still prevalent in classrooms. So when we think about students who are labeled as English language learners, we need to move beyond simplification. So we need to really think about how you provide high challenge and high support. So how can you make your classes challenging, use grade level texts, but also provide the scaffolding support that they need, both through planned and interactional scaffolds that are culturally sustaining for them.
Yeah, and for that high support piece, I guess, translanguaging, using students' first home languages and their cultural resources come into play.
Exactly, exactly, absolutely. That would be as part of the support that we talk about.
Instead of simplifying, rather providing that high support and fostering that multilingual ecology in the classroom.
Exactly. So you're providing abundant information, right? That's the whole idea of message abundance, right?
Do we have another question? Let's check. And I think we have a related question about how do you incorporate images in interactional scaffolding?
So I didn't show this, but the teacher was actually using, Mrs. Lee actually had the book and she was referring to different fonts, different images. And I actually have oh, it's here. Hold on, just a sec. I'm gonna get the book. So this book just came out. It's called From Text to Epitext. And it talks about how you can use the different epitextual information that you have beyond what is written in the book. So how to use the cover page, how you use the title page, how to use the back, how to talk to kids about these different elements that are part of the book, but perhaps not so much in evidence. So this book talks about that, and we have a chapter in it that goes into detail about how Ms. Cabana specifically focused on critical thinking and comprehension, using those epitextual elements. So you can do a lot in working with the pictures and the text together. Sometimes, Ms. Cabana did a picture walk before she started to read Last Stop on Market Street. But what is really important is sometimes what is in the pictures is not in the text and vice versa. So making those kinds of connections for students is really, really critical, because maybe they're seeing something in the pictures, but reading something different. So I would recommend, using those resources as well, talking about both, doing the picture walk, but also highlighting important information from the text.
Yes, providing that multi-model input also at the same time, enriching the classroom space with multimodality, multilingualism. Let's see if we have another question. How do these educators garner parent support for their classroom strategies? Sometimes parents believe that their child should be immersed in an English language environment only. I guess this also relates back to our earlier conversation in Dr. Garcia's keynote. How can we get parents' engagement and involvement in this process, and how can we get their buy-in?
I'm going to refer back to Paulo Freire. I think it's a process of conscientização, loosely translated as consciousness raising. So if they know that these strategies will actually help their students, their children, to do more and learn more in the classroom, I think that's the way to kind of explain that these are you cannot be in just an English only environment thinking that students don't come with any resources. So you're actually helping parents understand that what students bring to the classroom, what they're building in the home, is a critical component of what we do in the classroom with them, so that we are basically using all of the linguistic affordances that students bring to the classroom. And that is really what is so critical and important on culturally sustaining teaching practices, is that you are using what students bring, right? All of their linguistic affordances, but also connecting to learning a new language. So I think that that has been sort of a misconception sometimes, that the focus has to be on developing the English language, but without using the resources that students bring. And what culturally responsive teaching and pedagogies, really, we frame it as, we want to be able to not just respond to students' cultures and languages, right? So that's the notion of culturally responsive teaching. We are now beyond that and thinking about how can we sustain those practices that they learn at home, also in school with their peers, and also give them access to dominant languages so they can do more and learn more.
Yes. How can we meaningfully center their resources in the classroom?
Exactly.
We are out of time, but thank you so
Yes.
much, Dr. Oliveira, for your presentation again, for accepting our invitation to be part of this conference. And we were very happy to connect you with teachers, educators, scholars, students from across the world today. We had over, I believe, 150 attendees.
Wonderful.
So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks everybody for attending this session. And I look forward to seeing you in other presentations.
Yes, hopefully we'll meet in person.
Yes.
This time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully you'll be able to attend other sessions today.